Okay, this is the course assessment for Introduction to AQA A-Level Psychology. We're going to be looking at the topics on paper 1, 2 and 3, and we're also going to be discussing linear learning in A-Level Psychology and what that really means. So in terms of recap activity from the last section of this Introduction to Psychology A-Level course, I want you to have a read of this question here, and I want you to identify where the assessment objectives are in this particular question. So feel free to pause the PowerPoint, have a read and have a think, where are those AO1, AO2 and AO3 signifiers within this question? Okay, so here we have a STEM. So Carly thinks that all behaviour can be explained, etc. The question underneath, outline SLT theories and explanation of behaviour, compare and contrast this with the biological approach, refer to the comments above in your answer. Now here, what hopefully you should have identified is your outline word is your command word for assessment objective 1. You compare and contrast with the biological approach. Some of you may not have got this, that's fine, but that would really be your discuss. You're kind of comparing it, the strengths and weaknesses against the biological approach. So that's going to be your assessment objective 3. You're referring to the comments above is going to be your assessment objective 2. So you're here referring to the comments above, you're using that STEM and explaining SLT or biological approach based on the information they've given you there, and you've got to quote it in a meaningful way. So in terms of paper 1, these are the topics that you will be assessed on in the first paper. This paper will be 2 hours. Each paper is 2 hours long. Breaking that down, really roughly, you'll be having about half an hour for each topic in terms of timing for the exam. You'll be assessed on 4 topics here, so attachment, social influence, memory and psychopathology. There's 24 marks for each section, which is roughly about 33.3% of the mark. And there are just some questions here just to get you thinking about some of the things you might be covering. So attachment, for example, what happens when an infant has no mother or mother figure as they grow up, what happens to their attachment? How does that translate to adulthood? How infant attachment actually affects later adulthood behaviour. Social influence, we cover kind of 2 main really behaviours, conformity and obedience. We also look at social change as well, and minority influence. Memory, we look at different memory models, so how we actually store memories. We actually look at how we forget as well. I think this is really useful for a lot of students, especially when it comes to revising as well. And we look at eyewitness testimony and what happens when that goes wrong in the court. Psychopathology, we look at 3 main disorders. So you'll be looking at OCD, depression, and phobias lastly, and you look at what is meant by abnormality. So what does abnormality mean to you in terms of behaviour, and what are the definitions that we have within the specification to define those. So in terms of the paper, you can expect a multitude of ways that you'll be assessed. So multiple choice questions, there will be, short answer questions and extended questions. Now when we say extended questions in Psychology A-Level, the maximum mark you'll get for a question is 16. So that is your longest mark, your longest question. I know some of you from GCSE might have had longer markers than that, maybe 20 markers. So here the maximum is 16. So for paper 2, it's again a 2-hour exam, but I think the thing to stress here is that research methods is worth 48 marks, not 24. So unlike the other topics in all the papers that are worth 24 marks, so approaches here is 24 marks, biopsychology is 24 marks. Research methods really see that as kind of 2 sections of the paper because it's double the amount of marks. Can't really stress this enough. We've got a kind of later training PowerPoint in this series where we talk about the mathematical requirement, the statistical requirement. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail. But this is worth 48 marks, the research methods section. So we look at how we might design and pick a study, what it means to be employing the scientific method, how to analyse data sets, and really a refresh of mathematical skills. The mathematical skills that are in the A-Level Linear Psychology course are really a refresh of your GCSE mathematical skills. But don't worry, this is all going to be recapped and it will be taught. So even if you've maybe forgotten how to work something out like fractions or whatever, that will be reviewed, if you like, here. So approaches, we have many approaches that we cover in psychology. Just to name a few, we've got the behavioural approach, humanistic approach, psychodynamics. So some of you might recognise some key psychologists here like Freud, like Skinner. So you'll be covering those in the approaches section, how we explain behaviours from the different approaches and how we kind of compare them each off with each other. Biopsychology, as is in the name, is your biological psychology section. So we're very much explaining behaviour from the biological perspective. So we look at things like the nervous system, we look at chemicals, neurotransmission, brain areas, brain lobes, brain regions, brain plasticity. We look at bodily rhythms like the sleep-wake cycle as well, and how we study the brain. And lastly, that research methods section as well, can't stress that enough, that is 48 marks worth. And again, in paper 2, you can expect a variety of ways to be assessed. So again, you will be having multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and extended questions. Again, now the 16-mark question you will be getting in approaches and biopsychology, but there isn't a 16 marker in research methods. The maximum marker you'll get in research methods is 12, and that generally will be to design a study based on a STEM. Paper 3 then, this is the optional paper, but to stress this is not an optional paper for you to choose which topic you're doing. Your centre or your school, your college will be choosing which topics that they will be teaching you and therefore which ones you will be completing in the exam. So the compulsory topic in paper 3, which every centre, every student will be covering, is issues and debates. So that are topics like the nature-nurture debate, whether we have free will, whether everything's determined, holism, reductionism, things like ethics. So that's your issues and debates. Your option 1, you've got relationships, gender, and cognition and development. So it could be any of those, but it'll just be one of those topics for that second section. The option 2 is out of schizophrenia, eating behaviour, and stress. And your option 3, you can see there, aggression, forensics, or addiction. And again, each section here, because you've got 4 sections, is worth 24 marks. Again, it's a 2-hour paper, so roughly half an hour on each section here. And again, with paper 3, as is with all the others, you'll be having multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and extended. Again, the maximum mark here again is 16 marks. And you probably, it's highly likely you will be getting a 16 mark extended question on most sections there in the paper 3. So in terms of linear learning, what does that actually mean? You're taking your exams at the end of the 2 years. Overall, in terms of the A-level course, there are 11 topics to learn. Now, it's really important that the topics you learn in your year 1 are consolidated throughout year 1, but more importantly, year 2. Don't go by the fact that you've learnt the topics in year 1 and you're going to necessarily relearn them in year 2. You're not. So it's really important, once you've learnt them in year 1, you refresh over them in year 2. Okay, now although many linear topics here in psychology overlap, they're linked, related, they can be recycled with each other. There are 11 topics. There's a lot to learn, so it's really important that you revisit those earlier topics you do within your course. So something to keep in mind when you start studying for your A-Level Psychology course. So today we've looked at the review of the topics on paper 1, 2 and 3 and the proportion of marks, the percentages and the type of questions that you'll be getting. And we've also just there discussed what linear learning in A-Level Psychology means.